all of us. So how could we solve that?
Okay, so the number one cause of climate change is deforestation caused by smallholder farmer poverty. So if you solve smallholder farmer poverty, you then solve the number one cause of deforestation. And we're solving that. Smallholder farm poverty is the number one cause of pretty much everything on that screen. So if you ask me how, then again I'll explain how, but it really comes down to poor situations and taxation. Like, I love taxes. Nobody else here would like taxes, and they are the best thing in the world. French people, what's the tax rate in France? The tax rate?
Between 25 and 45%.
It's terribly low, and that's why it's very unstable in France. If you go to Scandinavia, it's extremely stable. There is a lot of, there's less social less social problems because of taxation. You have free education, you have good road systems, good health care, and everything else. You look at Japan, the same thing. It comes down to taxation. But the only way you can have big taxation is when you start increasing income to farmers. So when you increase the income to farmers, then they become bankable. And once they're bankable, they have bank accounts. You can tax them, then you have frontline services. And it's the lack of frontline services which is causing all of these problems. And it comes down to farming. And the reason it comes down to farming is because 40% of the global population is a smallholder farmer. And everybody ignores them. It's always what you need. Like in your lifetime, there's a phrase, in your lifetime, you need a doctor maybe 5 times in your life, depending on your health. A lawyer once or twice. You need a farmer 3 times a day. And yet these are the poorest people on the planet. So when you have no education, you have no infrastructure, you're not really part of the country that you live in. When that happens, you start making bad decisions because your education level is quite low. Because you're not worth too much to the society. Has anybody here heard of what's happening in Mindanao in the Philippines recently? Nobody knows what Mindanao is? Okay, Mindanao is a place in the Philippines which has become more or less independent with ISIS taking over. And Duterte has said it's because there's no frontline services. These are poor farmers. There's no real infrastructure. There's no doctors and no police. There's nothing to protect the population. So ISIS have gone in and they've basically taken over. And the government of the Philippines has said we cannot control it. So they've now done a deal with militants to control the situation. Everything comes down to taxation and access for the farmers to global markets for their produce. And farming, if you look at the countries which are the most stable, a lot of it's industrialized agriculture, but it's, you need a bank account, you need to be taxed, and you need to end farmer poverty. And everything coming up on the SDG goals, it's very nice, but they don't actually say how to solve it. So we figured out how to solve that one thing, and that one thing solves the rest. So that's what I do. Before this, I headed a large architectural firm, and I was advising 3 states on the future of urban design. The problem with that is, although they all agree with what we were doing, we had like 400 architects, they all agree with what we proposed on how to progress and how to develop the cities for urban living, which is quite simple. Just every time the government changes, the previous government wants to implement it, but the new government won't get the credit. So they don't continue with it. So governments actually cause problems because they don't get the credit. If somebody was running to be a governor or a president and said, right, I'm going to put all this money into infrastructure and roads and bridges, it's not very sexy. It's just not. So they don't do it. But it's the stuff that you need. It's the most boring stuff that you take for granted, really. I'm from the UK, so we've got a fantastic health service. We have roads that work. We have police, which get good wages, so they're not really that corrupt. And that's all because there's correct amounts of taxation, although ours is getting worse. But it's all based on the farmers first coming out of poverty conditions. And it's, if you look at, say, ISIS and all these other people, the majority of the people that are members of ISIS, these are goat herders and farmers and poor people. And that's what really drives the problems. So that's pretty much the end of my presentation. But if people ask me questions, then I can explain more. But there's not a lot of people here, Ricky. So please ask away.
Guys, do you have any questions for Ryan? He says that he can solve a lot of global problems. Don't be shy. Yes. Hold on a second.
Hello. I'm just curious how your company is actually working towards solving one of these problems.
Sure. So so a small farmer has two causes of poverty, and that's it. One is access to markets, and the other is access to bank. If you have an access to a bank account, then you can get normal interest rates. But you only get those normal interest rates if you can actually prove